and I will have to probably read the slides because of the projection and as far back as the screen is. I don't know that many of you beyond the first 5 rows are going to really be able to read the slides, so I will read anything that has text. The gathering question that we have here, this comes from a report on the present state of the Spanish colonies in 1811, an observation made by somebody that was touring the Spanish colonies, or Mexico at the time, and made a comment: the aleo is the size of a horse, and like him has been used in the chariot. So the question is, what is an aleo? Anybody want to offer a suggestion? Good guess, not right. So the hint is it's not a horse, it's not a llama, it's not a bear or a wolf or sheep or a camel or a vacuna or a paco or an alpaca or a guanaco. So that kind of limits what it could be. Turns out it's a dog. There used to be about 25 or 26 varieties of Mexican dog. We now only have about 3. Chihuahua, the Mexican hairless, I forget which other. But there used to be 25 varieties, and the people in Mesoamerica used to breed these for specific purposes. The picture that's here says of the, and I can never pronounce this, let me try and hack it again, Isquantepatzali. The Mexican dog is said to have 6 teats, whereas the common dog has 10. Buffon, Pennant, and Gemlin have confounded this animal with the aleo, and it provides a reference there. The picture here is of the dog that I can't pronounce the name of, not the aleo. I've not found any surviving diagrams or pictures of the aleo. It went extinct shortly after this report in 1811. But it is a dog. It was reported to be at least the size of a Great Dane, if not bigger. So it was the size of a small horse. And it was used to pull chariots and carts. I thought that was just a real interesting reference. Okay, so today we're going to cover some overview of developing the internal model of the Book of Mormon geography, the basic Book of Mormon geography descriptions. So I know there's a lot of theories on where the Book of Mormon took place, so we're going to just go over those parts of the descriptions that if it occurred someplace in the world, it has to meet certain descriptions. And then I found actually a number of proofs. And these proofs are proofs that the Book of Mormon was written by a first-hand account before Christopher Columbus discovered America. And we'll go through those, and some of those are quite amazing. And everybody has interest in curlums and kumums, so I've pulled out an interesting tidbit there to present on those. All right, some basic facts. In the Book of Mormon, when it describes Old World geography, and when I say Old World, I mean around the Middle East, it describes 75 geography items. 53 are places, so those are cities or countries. 9 pertaining to water, that could be seas, rivers, or waters. 13 pertaining to physical geography, that would be mountains, valleys, wildernesses of that nature. In the New World, after the people moved from the Middle East, crossed the Great Waters, or the ocean, to the New World, that has 173 items described in the Book of Mormon. That's quite a few. So that encompasses 87 places, so that's cities and lands, 9 pertaining to water, so that's seas, rivers, and waters, 76 pertaining to physical geography, that's mountains, valleys, wildernesses, and it talks about 2 battle sites. All right, so what I did was first I created an internal model, and an internal model is nothing more than saying something is here and another one is here, and I don't care where in the world it is, but this is here and this is here and this is over here and this is over here. So that's what I did first, because I didn't want to be biased by trying to put anywhere in the world where these things happen. I just want to say, what does the Book of Mormon say about where these things are located relative to each other? And after that, I then started looking at where in the world that information actually fit, and I'll go through that. So when we talk about finding one place relative to another, there's two relationships. One is an east-west relationship, the other is a north-south relationship. Now I just picked Dallas and Independence. So Dallas is west of Independence and Dallas is south of Independence. You can look on a map and see that's true. So we have two places, one line, and we have two relationships. So let's throw another one in there. So let's throw Huntsville, Alabama in there. And we can identify the east-west relationships and we can identify the north-south relationships. But the key thing here is we now have three places. That's now jumped to three lines, and that's six relationships. Let's throw another one in there. Let's throw Wichita in there. So now we have four places. The list is getting longer, both the east-west and the north-south relationships. And we have four places. We now have six lines, and we have 12 relationships. Throw another one in there. Throw Lamoni in there. We now have 5 relationships. You can't read this list. I can't read this list. This is an eye chart. 4 places, 10 lines, 12 relationships. What you see here is you start adding another place and the number of relationships is increasing geometrically. So finally, when you're talking about 173 places, you're talking about a possible 14,878 lines or 29,756 relationships. And the thing is, yeah, it would look like that if you tried to map it out. When you're describing geography, every single one has to be correct. Because if anything gets out of place, your map's out of place. So if we said Dallas were stated as being north of Lamoni, but south of Wichita, Independence, and Huntsville, we'd actually need 2 locations on the map for Dallas, one down south where it's supposed to be, but if we have a relationship stated that is north of Lamoni, we would have to add something else up here to account for it, and then we have a map with Dallas in 2 different places. This is the first thing that you can use to judge any type of geography theory in the Book of Mormon. If somebody has 2 places named exactly the same, they're probably not interpreting the relationships correctly. So there's just a couple mathematical equations up here. I'll just skip ahead. What's wrong is this one right here. 13 plus 7 is not 18, it's 20. When we have mathematical relationships, we can take a look at each and every one individually and know, hey, that's right or that's wrong. Well, if we do that with places that are stated as east-west of another or north and south of another, if we don't have a map, we just have the statement, it's not real obvious whether that statement is right or wrong. We have to use that and judge it against other statements being made and ask the question, is this statement consistent with other statements that are being made? And the one here that's out is Lamoni is not south of Dallas. That's wrong, but we would need a map to know that. So, do you change a map if you run across an error? Or do you make your map, if you've got 5 places that are consistent and one that's inconsistent, do you say that one is an error and you go with the 5 that are consistent with each other? All right, so in the Book of Mormon, there might be one inconsistency. I don't think so. It all has to do with grammar on one particular verse, and that verse is from Alma. And when I give references, I'm going to give the RLDS 1908 versification first, followed by the LDS versification. So in Alma 15:23 or 27:22, and it came to pass that the voice of the people came, saying, Behold, we will give up the land of Jershon, which is on the east of the east by the sea, which joins the land bountiful, which is on the south of the land bountiful, and this land, Jershon, is the land which will give unto our brethren for an inheritance. A lot of people try and figure out what this means. The grammar, when you have so many whiches, like which is this and which is this and which is this, it's not consistent whether that which is talking about the first subject of the sentence or a subject that came right before it. And the key here that people get hung up on is which joins the land bountiful. So the question is, what joins the land bountiful? Is it Jershon or is it the sea east? And that's the crux of interpreting the grammar in this verse. I believe it talks about the sea east joining the land bountiful. That makes sense. We've got 17 other points that put the land Jershon somewhere else. If you tried to say that Jershon was bounded on the southward side of the land bountiful. So that leads me to believe that the grammar is best interpreted that the sea east joins the land bountiful in this verse. In which case, all other geography references in the Book of Mormon are consistent. So all those 173 places, they have consistent relationships mentioned in the Book of Mormon. All right, so the internal model, I completed this in 2002. And like I said, that's nothing more than just take a piece of paper and you say, it says this is here and it says this is to the east, so I'll mark that to the east. I don't care where in the world it is, so long as I know that this is east of that. So I did that in 2002. I then finished in 2004 looking at where in the world that internal model fit. And then I started looking for proofs. Very specific.
Do you have a phone in your pocket? They think it might be causing that interference.
Okay.
Sorry.
I will. There. We'll get rid of any possible interference there. All right. Then over the next several years, I found proofs where very, very specific descriptions were identified, and I'll get into those in the second half of the presentation here. But these proofs could not have been known in 1831. Just could not have been known. All right, so when you end up with an internal map, it looks something like this. We've got a sea west and a sea east. We've got a narrow neck. And then we have all sorts of cities and lands and hills and valleys and bodies of water. And so everything on this map is just saying that one item, Bountiful is here, Mulek is over here. I know Mulek is to the west of Bountiful. That's all you get on a map like this. Something is north of something, something is east or west of something. That's all you get for an internal model. And if we start looking at kind of the middle part of the Book of Mormon lands, we've got the riverside on that goes this way, and we've got Zarahemla and kind of here in the middle, and the south wilderness down here, and we have the east wilderness over here. And we have a number of other cities. I won't go into describing every one of these because there's 173 of these items on the Book of Mormon geography. But you get a map that looks like this. And if we take a look at the southern part of what's described in the Book of Mormon lands, again, the south wilderness is here. City of Nephi, land of Nephi is here. Waters of Mormon is over here someplace. And we have Amulon down here as one of the southernmost places described in the Book of Mormon. So got all of those plotted out. Got those on a map, great. So we've got to find some place to put it in the world. But let's just take a look at some of the basics that any place that this fits has to meet. So the first one is cold. There really must be no cold or snow. There's only one reference to snow, and that's in 1 Nephi 346 or 11:8, and the whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow. So this statement was made by Nephi in the valley of Lemuel in the Old World. So the people in the Book of Mormon knew about snow, yet there are no references to colder snow mentioned in the Promised Land after they crossed the ocean. There is a reference to being naked in the first month of the year. This comes from Alma 24, this is 43:4, and 20:23 or 43:20. For behold, it came to pass that the Zoramites became Lamanites, therefore, in the commencement, and commencement means the beginning. So when it says commencement, it says the first month of the year. Of the 18th year, the people of the Nephites saw that the Lamanites were coming upon them, therefore they made preparations for war. Yea, they gathered together their armies in the land of Jershon. They had only their swords and their scimitars and their bows and their arrows and stones and slings, but they were naked, save it were skin which was girded about their loins. Yea, all were naked, save it were the Zoramites and the Amalekites. So here's a reference of armies being naked in the first month. So that just reemphasizes that there really was no cold or snow referenced in the New World or the Promised Land in the Book of Mormon. There was reference to one kind of coldness, and that was hail. And this is in Mosiah 7:53. And it came to pass that I will send forth hail among them, and it shall smite them, and they shall also be smitten with the east wind, and insects shall pester their land also and devour their grain. So we do have one description of coldness, and that's hail. All right, so the summary is the Nephites knew about snow, because we have that from the Old World, and it does snow in Israel. It does snow there. But there's no mention of snow in the New World or in the Promised Land after crossing the Great Waters. Armies were naked in January, and there is hail in the New World. So if anybody has a theory of where in the world this is, it has to be consistent with these descriptions. All right, so it talked a little bit about the east wind, so let's talk about the east wind. So there must be an east wind of destruction. It's a key description for locating the lands in the Book of Mormon, and that it has to have some place where a wind from the east is strong enough to cause immediate destruction, and occurs often enough that it's useful to be used as a warning or an analogy. So what I just read, King Mosiah was talking about it being something that people already knew about, that it would come again. So it happens often enough that it can be used as an analogy. In Mosiah 5:50 or 7:31, and again he said, if my people shall sow filthiness, they shall reap the east wind which bringeth immediate destruction. And the full section in Mosiah 7:51, this is 12:6 through 12:8 in the LDS. And it shall come to pass that I will smite this my people with sore afflictions, yea, with famine and with pestilence, and I will cause that they shall howl all the day long. Yea, I will cause that they shall have burdens lashed upon their backs, and they shall be driven before like a dumb ass. And it shall come to pass that I will send forth hail among them, and shall smite them, and they shall also be smitten with the east wind, and insects shall pester their land also and devour their grain. So that was the full description of the east wind. So if we take just look at the world and what happens with winds, there's a jet stream, but that moves from west to east. So that's why all the fronts that come through the United States go west to east. There are tropical easterlies that do blow in an east to west direction, but they're very steady, very calm. They might be 5 to 10 knots in speed, so anything approaching being destructive. Well, the backside of a strong low-pressure system can generate a damaging easterly wind. Well, we have nor'easters that go up the eastern seaboard. Well, you get the backside of that low-pressure system, that can cause some damaging winds. That's a possibility. Hurricanes and typhoons generally travel in an east to west direction and generate damaging winds. That's fairly obvious. Also in the Middle East, winds from the east are drying winds and often bring locusts. So the destruction in the Middle East is not by the wind itself, by what the wind brings after it comes. So that's kind of an interesting way of maybe interpreting that. And this was interesting. In England, storm surges from strong low-pressure systems occur on the east coast, so much so that the Romans first built earth banks on the east coast to protect them from the waves that were being driven by this easterly wind. So that was interesting. All right, let me go over to the narrow neck. That's a fairly famous description in the Book of Mormon. So there is an area called the narrow neck, and it's mentioned in Alma 36 or 63:5. And it came to pass that Hagoth, he being exceeding curious man, therefore he went forth and built him an exceeding large ship on the borders of the land bountiful with the land desolation, and launched it forth into the west sea by the narrow neck, which led into the land northward. And in Ether 4:68 or 10:20, and they built a great city by the narrow neck of land by the place where the sea divides the land. So we have a description for a narrow neck. We have another description. This comes from Alma 13:76 or 22:32. And now it was only a distance of a day and a half's journey for a Nephite on the land bountiful and the land desolation from the east to the west sea. So this is commonly used as a description for how large the narrow neck was. I want to point out, though, that when it says from the east to the west sea, it doesn't specify east sea. It just specifies some point on the east. Many people interpret this to describe the West Sea and the East Sea, but it really only describes a point on the east. It's important to note the description does not describe going all the way to the sea east, just to some point on the east. There's a similar construction in Alma 22:8 or 58. And the land of Nephi did run in a straight course from the east sea to the west. Again, both seas are not mentioned, just a point on the west. So there is a consistency here. We do know it's some point on the east for the narrow neck, some point on the west for the land Nephi. Doesn't necessarily go all the way to the seas on both sides. So how many miles can a person travel in 1.5 days? So a very fit person can travel 40 miles in a day over unimproved trails, so we're talking about 60 miles in a day and a half. American Indian runners have been known to run 75 to 100 miles a day. That seems like excessive amounts, but a lot of times 2 kids would just say, I can outrun you, and they'd be gone for the day. And they'd travel 75 to 100 miles, and they'd show up back at night. Travel through jungle, where there are no trails, can be as low as 10 to 15 miles a day. The world record for a 48-hour run is 428,890 meters, or 266 miles. This is on a completely flat track, so this would be an upper limit to how far somebody can travel in a day and a half. So we're talking about 200 miles in a day and a half. Believe it or not, canoe travel is only as much or less than what you can travel on foot. There's only one place in the world, the Yukon River, that's nice, flat. You can really just keep on going, and you don't even have to worry about running into things at night because it's such a large river, and there's enough light up there in the summertime that you can just travel 24 hours a day and not have to stop. But anywhere else in the world, canoe travel is only as much or less than foot travel. So some kind of best estimate, if we're going to throw out a guess for how wide the narrow neck is, should be somewhere between about 15 and 200 miles. That's very, very rough estimate. But, something along that magnitude. Okay, wildernesses. Let's talk about those for a little bit. When I first started looking into the Book of Mormon, I didn't really pay too much attention to the wildernesses. The dilemma is they're not described very clearly in some aspects, but yet when you really start looking at them, they do provide some vital clues about where in the world the geography occurs. So at first they seemed kind of uninteresting, and I left most of them out of the early analysis. I included the east and the south wildernesses and the Hermounts, which is off to the northwest. That didn't seem to be enough, and then at that point I started asking myself, well, why did I throw out looking at all these other wildernesses? So I started throwing all those in and found some other indicator words that when it talks about going over something, they're actually talking about going over terrain, so that would be some kind of a hill or a ridge or something of that nature. So I threw all those in. It turns out that wildernesses ended up being quite helpful to understanding the geography in their own way. Wildernesses turned out they're like a raised or elevated area, kind of like a hill or a plateau. There must be an elevated area to the south parts of the land, because we're talking about a south wilderness, so we know that exists. In Alma 11:9 or 16:6, and Alma returned and said unto them, Behold, the Lamanites will cross the river Sidon in the south wilderness, away up beyond the borders of the land Manti. And we'll talk about that verse a little bit more. There's more information to be garnered from that. In Alma 13:74 or 22:30, and it bordered upon the land which they called Desolation, it being so far northward, it came into the land which had been peopled and been destroyed, of whose bones we have spoken, which was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, it being the place of their first landing, and they came from there up into the south wilderness. So that's another reference that you have to go up to get into the wildernesses. There's elevated areas to the north and west. This comes from Alma 195 or 236. And the Nephites did pursue them with their might, and they did slay them. Yea, they were met on every hand and slain and driven until they were scattered on the west and on the north, and they had reached the wilderness, which was called Hermounts. So we actually have a name for that wilderness, the Hermounts. There's an elevated area on the east part of the land next to the sea, and that comes from Alma 22:9 or 59. And it came to pass that when Moroni had driven all the Lamanites out of the east wilderness, which was on the north of the lands of their own possessions, he caused that the inhabitants who were in the land of Zarahemla and in the land round about should go forth into the east wilderness, even to the borders by the seashore, and possess the land. So you can see little tidbits in there that help us figure out where these wildernesses are located. And there are 44 other wildernesses or ridges described in the Book of Mormon. Wildernesses indicate a significant aspect of geography. Sometimes there's a reference called the wilderness side, and this is used in 4 places. One's in Alma 6:6, LDS 8:5, Alma 11:2, 16:2, Alma 13:73, or 22:29, and Alma 26:134, or LDS 58:13. So to have a wilderness side, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, means that you have to have a side that's wilderness and a side that's not wilderness. Well, the side that's not wilderness is going to be flatter than the wilderness side. All right, then the river Sidon is also an important part of the Book of Mormon geography. So what characteristics does the river Sidon have? Well, it's northward flowing, and some people even debate that, but I will have a slide that goes through why it's northward flowing. It has water above ground. Does that sound strange to anybody to make a statement like that? Normally you would think, well, of course a river is above ground. Well, there are 2 references, Alma 20:97 or 44:22, and it came to pass that they did cast their dead into the waters of Sidon, and they have gone forth and are buried in the depths of the sea. And in Alma 192 or 234, and thus he cleared the ground, or rather the bank, which was on the west of the river Sidon, throwing in the bodies of the Lamanites who had been slain into the waters of Sidon, and thereby his people might have room to cross and contend with the Lamanites and the Amalekites on the west side of the river Sidon. When I was going through the Book of Mormon, this word cross is an indicator word. Cross or a cross is only used in the Book of Mormon when somebody is actually physically crossing water. Whereas in our society, I could say I could cross over to that side of the room. That usage never occurs in the Book of Mormon. When it says across or cross, it's reserved for going over water. And I went back and looked in the Bible to see if there was a similar pattern, and there is. Passed over is the phrase in the Bible that's used when people cross over water. So there's a phrase, passed over Jordan. Well, that's crossing the River Jordan. So I thought that was really interesting. And we could certainly go into the description of Passover and what that means and what water means to that, but we won't go into that today. And I mention that because I've had discussions with people that talk about placing the Book of Mormon lands in Baja, California. And to do so, they use the river San Ignacio as the river Sidon. Well, that river flows east to west, and it also flows 15 to 20 feet underground. It actually has a pretty good flow, but it flows 15 to 20 feet underground. Every once in a while, it'll percolate up to some pools at surface level, but it's 15 to 20 feet underground. Certainly not a description where you have to clear a bank and throw people into the water. So that's just one of those things that when you're looking at a world location, you have to think about things like this. Okay, more characteristics of the River Sidon. It has a river or a valley, the Valley Gideon, entering the River Sidon from the east, just south of a prominent hill, the hill Amnihu. So those are all mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Has an east and west branch where the river transitions from a flatter lowlands to the hilly wilderness headwater. So this is one of those usages of the wilderness side. So it needs to have both a transition from a flatter terrain to hilly terrain, and in that location have a branch, both an east and west branch. And I've got a proof that talks about this, very powerful testimony later on. All right, so let's just kind of put everything we know about the River Sidon together. First reference is from Alma 170 or 215 to Alma 176 or 217. And this talks about the hill Amnihu being between Zarahemla and Gideon. And so we have to have the city of Zarahemla and the valley of Gideon, which is mentioned in Alma 4:8 or LDS 6:7. So we have that piece of information. We have another piece of information where Manti and the South Wilderness are together. And this is where it talks about the South Wilderness being on the wilderness side of the land Manti. So we know that. And we know that the head of the River Sidon is by Manti, and this is mentioned in Alma 20:25 or LDS 43:22. So we have that piece of information. We have Manti is south of Gideon, and that comes from Alma 12:1 or LDS 17:1. We have a description in Alma 1373 to 1377. This is 2229 to 2232. Land of Zarahemla is north of the head of the Sidon and north of the land of Nephi. So we have that piece of information. And we also have a piece of information that the land of Zarahemla is lower in elevation than Gideon, and that comes from Alma 29:6 and 7 or LES 62:6 and 7. So you put all this information together, and the River Sidon has got to flow from headwaters northward. So that's how you kind of start putting all this information in the Book of Mormon geography together, is all those bits and pieces. Okay, there are some bodies of water mentioned in the Book of Mormon. There must be at least two large bodies of water north of the narrow neck. These are described in Helaman 2 verses 3 and 4 or 3:3 in LDS. There were an exceeding great many who departed out of the land of Zarahemla and went forth unto the land northward to inherit the land, and they did travel an exceeding great distance, insomuch that they came to large bodies of water and many rivers. So we know the large bodies of water are not rivers, because rivers are also mentioned in the same sentence. So we do have, plural, at least 2 large bodies of water. One of those must be the largest body of water in the land. We get that from Ether 680, or 15:8 in the LES. And it came to pass that he came to the waters of Ripley-Ancum, which by interpretation is large, or to exceed all. Wherefore, when they came to these waters, they pitched their tents, and Shiz also pitched his tents near unto them, and therefore on the morrow they did come to battle. So we have a description that one of the bodies of water is large, or to exceed all. All right, so there are geological forces described, and let's go over those. So there needs to be a significant geological forces evident. So either earthquakes, tsunamis, storm surges, winds that can explain the destructions described in 3rd Nephi. We have an east wind of destruction, which we covered earlier. Forces that can break up the ground. So there are many discussions of breaking up the ground and causing valleys to be made. There are forces that can cause water to come up. That's the phrase used, to come up. So somehow water has got to come up to cover cities. 3rd Nephi 4:11, talking about the forces caused to break up the ground. And the highways were broken up, and the level roads were spoiled, and many smooth places became rough, and many great and notable cities were sunk, and many were burned, and many were shook till the buildings thereof had fallen to the earth. That's another key piece of information. And the inhabitants there. And behold, the city of Gadiandi, and the city of Gadiamna, and the city of Jacob, and the city of Gimgimno, all these have I caused to be sunk, and made hills and valleys in the places thereof. So what would that possibly be? These are pictures of what it looked like after the magnitude 9 earthquakes in Alaska. You can see there are some significant displacements in the earth there. Certainly some you would call valleys, and some creating hills. So this is what a magnitude 9 earthquake can do. All right, so there need to be forces described that cause water to come up over cities. This is in 3rd Nephi 4:32, or LDS 9:7. Yea, in the city of Onihah and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Mokum and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Jerusalem and the inhabitants thereof, and waters have I caused to come up in the stead thereof. So somehow water's got to come up. So many cities have burned with fire that came down. These are described in 3rd Nephi 4:38 and 39, or LDS 9:10 and 9:11. And behold, the city of Laman, and the city of Josh, and the city of Gad, and the city of Kishiman have I caused to be burned with fire, and the inhabitants thereof, because of their wickedness in casting out the prophets, and stoning those whom I did send to declare unto them concerning their wickedness and their abominations. And because they did cast them all out, that there were none righteous among them, I did send down fire and destroy them, that their wickedness and abominations might be hid from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints whom I sent among them might not cry unto me from the ground against them. So, fire that comes down, what can that be? Well, we can talk about volcanoes. They certainly spew up fire, and that fire's got to come down someplace. When we're talking about that stuff that comes out of volcanoes, it's called ejecta, and there's actually one kind that's called a bomb. It's the term that they use. It's a bomb. And what that is just a big glob of lava that comes out, and as it goes through the air, it solidifies because it cools down in the air, and then it lands some distance away. Turns out those can travel 12 to 50 miles away from a volcano. That's quite a ways. Problem is, by the time they travel 12 to 50 miles, they're cooled off. They're just hard rocks at that point. Can't really cause fire. There is one type of bomb that actually cools a little bit on the outside, and the inside is still warm. And then when that hits, it kind of breaks open, and then you've got the heat from the inside that can be there potentially to ignite a fire. However, I haven't been able to find any reliable source that describes fires caused from a volcano occurring more than a couple miles away from the volcano. So certainly not out to the 12 to 50 miles. Can we also talk about lightning strikes? That comes down, that causes fire. Possible. We do have a description in 3 Nephi 4:16 or 8:19. And it came to pass that when the thunderings and the lightnings and the storm and the tempest and the quakings of the earth did cease, for behold, they did last for the space of about 3 hours, and it was said by some that the time was greater. So we do have a description that lightning was part of the destructions. Meteorites, that comes down. Everybody knows that meteorites are nice and fiery things as they come through the atmosphere. The problem is only the large meteorites that hit the ground and cause significant explosions cause fire. The smaller ones, by the time they hit the ground, they're about the same temperature as ambient air temperature, and they don't cause fires. They just hit the ground. Another thing that is in the Book of Mormon that's really kind of a often looked over piece of information is ship timber. So there's a short description in Helaman that can be used to test a world location for the Book of Mormon geography. This comes in Helaman 2:7 or 3:7 in LDS, and there being but little timber upon the face of the land, nevertheless the people who went forth became exceeding expert in the working of cement. Therefore they did build houses of cement in which they could dwell. And going on in Helaman 2:9, and the people who were in the land northward did dwell in tents and houses of cement, and they did suffer whatsoever tree should spring up upon the face of the land, that it should grow up, that in the time they might have timber to build their houses, yea, their cities and their temples and their synagogues and their sanctuaries and all manner of their buildings. So we have this description that that part of the world really didn't have much timber. And if you think about it, there aren't too many of those locations in the world. We'll go over another aspect here, following on in Helaman 2:10, LDS 3:10. And it came to pass, as timber was exceeding scarce in the land northward, they did send forth much by the way of shipping, and thus they did enable the people of the land northward that they might build many cities, both of wood and of cement. So now we have a description of a place that has few trees, but you can get to it with shipping. That really kind of narrows down possible locations in the world. So we have the land of northward was a sizable an area, Helaman 2:4 or 3:4, and they did travel to an exceeding great distance, insomuch that they came to large bodies of water and many rivers. So, in shipping timber, a place northward of Zarahemla had little timber, or few trees, near water used for shipping timber from elsewhere. So a world location needs to have a sizable place with many rivers and multiple bodies of water, one being the largest body of water, and little timber, and be near water deep enough for shipping. So that really kind of narrows down where it might occur. Shipping had to come from an area with sufficient wood to export. Cement, I've heard a lot of people try and make a case for cement. Turns out the materials that you need to make cement are fairly common around the world. You need limestone, clay, heat that up, it'll react, you have cement. Romans used volcanic ash for cement. A lot of places on the world where cement is possible, the materials are there. So really using cement to test for a world location isn't really going to be very good because it is possible to create cement just about anywhere in the world. The key to making cement is heating the material hot enough to make it dry enough. When you set something out in the sun and let it dry, some of the water comes out, but there's still water molecules locked in that material. You really have to heat material up to like 1,000 degrees to get that water that's locked in that material out. Then whenever you mix water back into that material, it just wants to soak it in and react with things. And so that's why you can heat up your clay and limestone to about 1,000 degrees. And then when you mix that together and mix water in, you get this reaction that creates what we call cement. So, in the Book of Mormon, could cement just mean mud? Well, in Hebrew, there's a word called melet, which is used to describe mortar or clay. It comes from a Proto-Semitic malat, which means to be smooth or slippery as a plastered wall. So the uses in the pre-Semitic writing, they were talking about cement as just something you would plaster a wall with. Jeremiah 43:9, it says, "Take great stones in thine hand and hide them in the clay," or the millet, "in the brick kiln, which is at the entry of Pharaoh's house." So that's where we have the description for cement. And it's really not talking about what we would call cement. It's talking more about what we would call clay bricks. Let's talk a little bit about the land desolation. Book of Mormon gives a very precise location for the land desolation. In Ether 136 or 213, "And now I proceed with my record, for behold, it came to pass that the Lord did bring Jared and his brethren forth, even to that great sea which divideth the land." So now we're talking about the great waters that they had to cross. In Ether 3:5 or 6:4, "And it came to pass that when they had done all these things, they got aboard their vessels or barges and set forth into the sea, commending themselves unto the Lord their God." So now we're talking about crossing the great waters. Continuing on into Ether 3:6 or 6:5, "And it came to pass that the Lord God raised that there should be a furious wind blow across the face of the waters toward the promised land. Thus they were tossed upon the waters of the sea before the wind." So very obviously they're crossing the ocean to the promised land. So the Jaredites crossed the great waters to the promised land. And as we continue in Ether 3:13 or 6:11, "And thus they were driven forth 344 days upon the water, and they did land upon the shore of the promised land. And it came to pass that they went forth upon the face of the land and began to till the earth." The note here is the land Moron was the first land described in the Book of Mormon, created after they landed at the promised land. That's in Ether 341 through 343 or 8:8 through 8:10. Ether 343 or 7:6, "Now the land Moron, where the king dwelt, was near the land which was called Desolation by the Nephites." The phrase here, "was near," is another indicator word or phrase. "Was near" in the Book of Mormon means next to. So that's how they describe next to. So we know that Moron and the land desolation were right next to each other. In Alma 36 or 63:5, "And it came to pass that Hagoth, he being an exceeding curious man," we've used this before, "therefore he went forth and built him an exceeding large ship on the borders of the land Bountiful by the land Desolation, and launched it forth into the West Sea by the narrow neck which led into the land northward." Mormon 171 or 3:7, and it came to pass that in the 361st year the Lamanites did come down upon the city desolation to battle against us. And it came to pass that in that year we did beat them, insomuch as they did return to their own lands again. Continue on to Mormon 173, and we did beat them again and did slay a great number of them, and their dead were cast into the sea. So now we have a battle by the land desolation that we know is close enough that the dead could be transported and tossed into the sea. So everything is focusing land desolation by the narrow neck, by the West Sea that was crossed by the Jaredites. Alma 39, or 63:7, and in the 38th year, this man Hagoth built other ships, and the first ship did also return, and many more people enter into it, and they also took much provisions, and set forth again to the land northward. So now we know that you can get from this part where the land desolation is, by the West Sea, is that sea that you can get to the land northward to ship wood. So there's another reference to the sea west and the great sea that divided the lands. This comes from Alma 1374 or 22:30, and it bordered upon the land which they call desolation, it being so far northward that it came into the land which had been peopled and been destroyed by whose bones we have spoken, this meaning the Jaredites, which was discovered by the people of Zarahemla, it being the place of the first landing after crossing the great waters, and they came from there into the south wilderness. So again, another confirmation that land desolation is right there by the narrow neck, where it is by the sea, which is the same sea that was crossed by brother Jared and those that went with them across the great waters. So the land and city of desolation is next to the West Sea, the same that is the great sea that divideth the lands. This means the land of desolation is not an inland location. We do have descriptions of inland seas in the Book of Mormon, but this is not one of those locations. This is definitely by an ocean that takes 344 days to cross. There is the reference to the sea in the wilderness, which is mentioned in Ether 129 or LDS 2:7. That is a sea that's an inland sea. But what we have, like I mentioned, described for the location for the city and land of desolation, this city and land of desolation is not by an inland sea. It is by an ocean. Talk a little bit about connected lands. So there's a phraseology in the Book of Mormon where you can actually identify what lands are actually connected to one another. And there are numerous references here. One is Alma 14:13 or 23:9. There gives 7 lands that are listed here: Ishmael, Madoni, Nephi, Shilam, Shemlon, Lemuel, and Shimnalon. Alma 26:15 or 56:13 has 4 other cities: Manti, Zeezrom, Kumeni, and Antipara. Alma 14:21 or 24:1 talks about Amulon, Helam, and Jerusalem. Mosiah 11:46 or 24:1 talks about Shemlon, Shalom, and Amulon. And 3 Nephi 4:32 or 9:7 talks about Onehai, Mokum, and Jerusalem. Turns out that when lands are listed in a list, first, the lands share a boundary. Second, the lands are listed in the geographical order that they share a boundary. So I've looked into the Bible, and near as I can find, the same pattern exists in the Bible. This piece of information I haven't been able to find anyone else describing, but it is consistent. And so this is one way of helping to determine what the geography of the Book of Mormon looked like. What this looks like on a map, we have Manti, Zeezrom, Kumenai, and Antipara, all located next to each other. We have lands, the 7 lands that I mentioned. And so all of these lands share boundaries with one another. So that just kind of helps the relative location of these have to be connected somehow in such a way that they all fit together. Talk a little bit about timing of wars. This is a graph of when wars occurred in the Book of Mormon, or when a particular time frame was given. Most of them occurred at the beginning of the year or at the very end of the year. Very few in the middle part. Now, I will say that there are 47 army movements that are not tied to any particular point of the year. But we do know that a significant number were occurring at the beginning of the year or the end of the year, which is not a time frame that in the northern hemisphere is a common time for armies to be moving. That was when people were bunkering down for the winter, storing things, and obviously if there's snow on the ground, it makes army movements very difficult. So there's very, very few references to army movements in the northern hemisphere during the winter months. Talk a little bit about polity sizes. So what do I mean by polity? Polity means something such as a country or state that has a government. We have cities in the Book of Mormon. Those cities have government. That's a polity. So why do we talk about polities? The size of the Book of Mormon says land should be traveled across in about 2 days. So how far is that? Livestock can travel about 11 to 13 days, or 11 to 13 miles a day. So land size there would be about 22 to 26 miles in diameter. A horse can be ridden about 40 miles a day. That's if you push it pretty hard. So we're talking about a land size that could be as high as 80 miles in diameter. Mentioned people can walk 20 to 40 miles a day, so we're talking 40 to 80 miles in diameter. Canoe travel about the same as people walking. But about 10 to 20 miles a day would be the sweet spot because the number of these references to the land sizes, we're talking about moving animals in flocks. So we're talking maybe 10 to 20 miles a day is what we would expect. So land size would be about 20 to 40 miles in diameter. But this is a rough calculation, but does that actually apply? Took a listing of all the U.S. counties, and the middle 50% of the U.S. counties ranged in size from 22 to 32 miles in diameter. Anybody know why that is? I know in Texas, the county sizes are about 40 miles in size. And that's because you can ride a horse from one county seat to the next county seat in one day. That was the definition of a county in Texas. That was how most of them were created. Until it got to the latter parts in the western part of Texas, and then they said, we don't use horses anymore, and they started making big, huge county sizes. Somebody was mentioning that up in the Midwest, about 25 miles is about the size of a county because they wanted to ride their horse from county seat to county seat and back in the same day. So that's pushing a horse 50 miles in one day. So, you know, it's all these sizes are grounded in really how far animals can move in a day. All right. That was the U.S., but let's take a look at something a little bit more in the past. There's a book called A Forest of Kings, has some diagrams in it, talked about Mayan polities, cities, city-states, and every city-state the Mayans had a glyph. It said, our city-state is named this. And so they identified the sizes of these city-states. And in 396 AD, there was a few around here in the Peten region. 692, there were more along the Usumacinta River and again in the Peten region. And in 790, you have quite a few centered in the same region. So I calculated or measured all of these polity sizes, And what I came up with was in 396, the average was about 32 miles, 692 about 44 miles in diameter, and 790 about 39 miles in diameter. So again, our rough calculation of 20 to 40 miles is holding true not only in times past, but also in times more current. So there is a general agreement for our rough estimate of 20 to 40 miles in diameter, and that held true for about 400 years. So we're looking for land sizes about 20 to 40 miles in diameter. Okay, so as a summary, if any of these are not satisfied, then a world location that somebody wants to put all the Book of Mormon lands in would not be consistent with the Book of Mormon. We're talking about 173 geographical entities, cities, lands, mountains, hills, ridges, accurate relationships, so there's no duplicate place names, no cold or snow, but there can be hail, east wind of destruction, a narrow neck of an appropriate size, wildernesses, at least 47 of them, the river Sidon, which is a northward flowing river, 2 or more bodies of water north of the narrow neck, geological forces evident, ship timber, an area of many rivers and no trees, land desolation by the city west or an ocean by the narrow neck, connected lands, timing of wars, and polity sizes. So we're going to take a short break here for about 5 minutes and then come back, and then I will present what I found in terms of a world location that meets this and other criteria. I looked at various narrow neck locations. Throw in Baja California, Denmark, Egypt, England, Florida, Italy, Korea, Malaysia, Mexico, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, Nicaragua, the Isthmus of Darien, Panama, Russia, Turkey, or the Bosporus Straits, and Turkey, Georgia, Russia, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Those are all the places that have some kind of narrow neck that has some kind of access to a West Sea. To save time, only the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in Mexico meets all the criteria. I've got a website that goes through all of them. I just don't want to go through it right here. Fits all 173 cities, lands, mountains, hills, ridges, battle sites, waters, accurate relationships, no duplicate places. So the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is 129 miles across, so that's well within the 15 to 200 mile really rough estimate that we were trying to come up with earlier. In terms of no cold or snow, these are temperature maps, one in January, one in July. In January, even the highlands can average 68 degrees. In the summertime, the highlands will average 77, much, much hotter in the lowlands. So really no cold or snow in that location of the world. East wind, I plotted the hurricane tracks since 1886 through 2003. There's kind of been not a whole lot since 2003 that have made landfall in the Mexico area. A couple, but not enough for me to update the map. You can see that a lot of the tracks and the blue dots are where it made landfall. So there's certainly plenty of tracks in this area of hurricanes hitting the Mesoamerica area. And King Limhi, when he made the comments in Mosiah about the east wind of destruction, would be right about there. So that's well within the hurricane tracks. Take a look at the wildernesses in the northern part of the lands when we're talking about the Book of Ether. We have lands, wildernesses described here, along here, and then up and along here. you can see the very same places that mountains in that mountainous area exists in that part of the world. If we take a look at where the wildernesses existed in the southern lands, you can see again they center around where hilly environments are occurring. So all the wildernesses fit. There are no wildernesses described in the Book of Mormon someplace where there would be flat areas. There's also one wilderness up west of Mulek, and there's a ridge. This would be somewhere around Cancun, and there's a bluff or a ridge just to the west of it, which is fairly significant. It has a northward flowing river. What's highlighted here in red is in the upper reaches it's called the Rio Salinas, and in the lower reaches it's the Rio Usumacinta. The headwaters occur up in here. They flow down through what would be the South Wilderness and northward in that direction. And we'll talk about this east and west branches later on. Then we have the land northward, talking about land of large bodies of water and many rivers. We have two large bodies, the Lago de Texcoco, which is where Mexico City is right now. They've drained it, so it doesn't really exist except for it's about a 30-hectare size lake right now, but they drained it in 1604. Then Lake Chapala up here, or on the outer reaches of this river system, the Rio Balsas, or locally also known as the Mezcala. And you can see there's quite a few rivers in that drainage system. So that meets the definition of land northward. In terms of geological forces that cause the destructions, this is a seismicity map of Mexico. The brown are the places that really get shook during an earthquake. So it certainly has earthquakes that can be used to describe the destructions in terms of raising ground or creating valleys. We have, by comparison, in the United States, this is what the seismicity map looks like. We've got the Madrid Fault here in the Midwest, most of the activities in California. And I know that there are some that propose a heartland theory for a location, but you see there's really no seismicity in the area where a heartland theory would have to explain some kind of ground breaking up. This is a map of Guatemala. The cities that were destroyed by fire would be right in this corridor right here. This is a map that I was able to locate from a Guatemalan journal, the Prensa Libre, and it translation is the main cause of accidents, translation being forest fires, are agricultural roses, poorly made. These are the fires set by the farmers to clear land. Cigarette butts in areas with dry grass, that's kind of obvious. Spray bottles that are thrown into vacant sites. I was trying to figure out how that started a forest fire, but it's enough to say it's one of the common ways that a forest fire starts. And weather conditions, meaning lightning. So much of Guatemala, and especially the area that were described as being destroyed by fire coming down, certainly is consistent with the descriptions in the Book of Mormon. So other geographical forces that were evident, the east wind of destruction, showed the charts for that earlier. Water that comes up, I will discuss when I get into the proofs. There is a proof for that. Talk about shipping and land that is devoid of trees. We have Land desolation here by the narrow neck. There happens to be these lagoons down here called Mar Muerta. And those have actually been used as shipping lagoons or shipping ports even before Columbus. The locals in the area would use those for shipping. So they've been used for shipping for a long time. They're fairly stable lagoons. You can get from there, you can travel by water all the way up to where the Rio Balsas comes out. So that is one way to get wood from this narrow neck area, which there's plenty of wood in that area, to a port, up to this arid area where the Rio Balsas is. It's quite arid. You have shrubs. You do have some trees close to the water line. And I've got a picture of that coming up. So that's consistent. And it's consistent with people traveling a long distance to be able to get into the land northward. And there are two ways to do that by land, and I will also be describing those in slides coming up. There's a pass here, and there's a pass here. There's two ways to get into the land northward. Otherwise, it's surrounded by mountains. It's very difficult. This is a picture of the Rio Balsas as it is close to the ocean. You can see it's very wide. It's very placid. Very easy to get shipping up into that area. And you can also see that the hills back here, these are all shrubs. Really no trees to speak of. All the trees are located close to the more permanent sources of water. Very easy for some population to outstrip the amount of wood there. And it being an arid location, they don't grow back very fast. If we talk about connected lands, we have connected lands up here. They fit. Some connected lands here. Gimgimno, Jacob, Gadiandi, Gadiamna, Ishmael, Nephi, Shalom, Shemlon, Lemuel. So all of the cities that were listed before do fit together in connected lands in this location. So the weather in central Mexico consists of 5 months of rainy season that starts in May and ends in September. So if the first part of the year is in the spring, that's the dry season. And so this is a picture of the same place in both the wet season and the dry season. You can see there's quite a bit of difference. Much easier to travel in the dry season. There's not as much vegetation. Also, it's not going to be as muddy. So based on the wars that we know that the Mayans pursued, they were all done typically during the dry season. A few in the wet season, but mostly in the dry season. Polity sizes. These are the cities and lands in the Book of Ether. Not a whole lot of them, so you could draw kind of whatever circle you want around them pretty much. Determine what size of area they controlled. So not really a lot of information here. This reference here, the red circle is a 20-mile diameter circle. So you can see they all fit there. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of cities in the Book of Ether described. When we get to the book of the other books in the Nephites, there's a lot of cities, a lot of lands, and yet in this area, they can all fit in at least a 20-mile-an-hour diameter land. Some cases 25 to 30, and in a few cases, the lands could actually be the size of 40 miles, which are the blue circles. So it's a pretty densely packed number of lands, and yet it does meet the definition in the Book of Mormon for what the size of the lands need to be. So I'm just going to go through just a quick couple of slides on the Book of Ether. It starts off by the Great Tower, And the Great Tower would be located in the upper Euphrates River system. They went up and then down into a valley. The only way you can kind of go up and then down into a valley is through two places in Turkey, and they both lead into the Araxes River Valley. And the Araxes River Valley starts about here, flows into the Caspian Sea, which is the description of where the Brotherhood of Jared and those people had to stop and create barges to cross the sea in the wilderness. So that's consistent. And then you can move across generally what would be what we would call the Silk Road, or what the Silk Road would be called later as trade was going across China, and go to a point on the China coast, and there happens to be a mountain right here, and a mountain that has minerals that could be mined, could explain the descriptions in the Book of Ether. So they got onto their barges and flowed across the ocean, 344 days, to land somewhere in this location that we've targeted. I did find a online tool application that is used to track items that fall overboard off of ships, and they can backtrack the floating of those to wherever they land up on the shores to figure out where they were in the ocean at a particular time, and they can actually pinpoint generally which ship that stuff fell off of. So I used that, and I plugged in, okay, can I put in a drift starting about here, and where does it go? Well, I was able to find, and they have data that goes back about 30 or 40 years, so not a great deal of background information, but at least enough to try something. So I tried it, and I found one date that I could plug in something here, and it would float all the way down here, down to just offshore of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and guess how many days it took to do that? 11 and a half months, which is right around 344 days. And they did land upon the shore of the Promised Land. So when we're talking about the Book of Ether and where it most likely occurred in the world, we're talking about where Mexico City is, or where Lake Texcoco started off, all the way down to the Narrow Neck or the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. A couple references for Hill Ephraim right there, but that's generally the lands that we're talking about in the Book of Ether. That's the general location. Okay, Nephites. Lehi left Jerusalem, went south, and in about 3 days you get to a location here on the Gulf of Aqaba. We call it the Gulf of Aqaba, but the people in history didn't call it the Gulf of Aqaba. They called it either the Red Sea or the Reed Sea. So in about 3 days, that's where you end up. And what you end up there is the only one of two perennial rivers in Saudi Arabia. And this is a picture of what it looks like. It's not much, but it does flow year-round. It is protected by some very high, steep canyon walls, which does help the water from being evaporated. But it's one of two perennial streams in Saudi Arabia, right there. So from there, they went south-southeast. That direction would take you down the coast of the Red Sea or Reed Sea, down to a place called Nahom. And from there, they wandered for a while, but they ended up to a place on the east. And just a short description, the trade routes in Saudi Arabia all went this direction through this area. When you get down to about here, the bluffs, the mountainous region in Saudi Arabia actually goes to the coastline, so it kind of cuts off any further travel along the coast. So what do? Well, you start going inland. There's a place to go up the escarpment, and you go inland. And somebody found several years ago a place called NHM, or Nail, right there, right where you have to depart from the coast and go inland. The place here, there's two places on the coast, east coast here, which have been known for shipbuilding. They have water, and they do have trees. And these are some pictures. One is Salala and the other is Wadi Sek. And these are just pictures of what they look like. So it does look very bountiful. So when we get across the great waters over into the New World with the Nephites, we're talking about they lived in an area from the many large bodies, so Lake Chapala and Lake Texcoco, all the way down to northern Honduras would be where they were located, in the lands and the cities. And 1 Nephi 5:12 or 18:23, and it came to pass that after we had sailed forth for the space of many days, we did arrive again at the promised land. And I would say they landed in the exact same place as the Jaredites in the Mar Muerto area. Okay, so let's go into some specific proofs. So these are my testimony of the truth of the Book of Mormon. So what do I mean by a proof? Well, I mean geographical description that is accurate and only known after 1831. So it wasn't on any map. It's not recorded anywhere. Means the description could only have come from a first-hand account local to the geography before the geography appears on any map. The order of progression is a reminder. I created the internal model first in 2002, so that was just where things were relative to each other. So once those relative positions are fixed, you can't shift them. So you can't take that information, put it in the world and say, well, this doesn't quite fit, so I'll manipulate that a little bit. You can't do that. You've got all the relationships. Those relationships have to be maintained wherever you put them in the world. The world location came next. Spent a couple years doing that. So the descriptions of the proofs that I go through in the very exact places where they need to be there. You can't shift them somewhere else and say, well, it's not here, but it's over here. That's close enough, so we'll say that's close. You don't get that. It has to be exactly where your internal map says it has to be. So what proofs exist? I'm going to talk about intersecting valleys, and these are described in the Book of Ether. There's a valley west and a valley east by the hill Riplah. That's described in the Book of Alma. The hill Amnihu is described also in the Book of Alma. The destruction of Moroni, Jerusalem, and Mokum and Onahah by water. These are destructions in 3rd Nephi. Plains in Mesoamerica. These are described in both Ether and Alma. Narrow passes, described in Alma and Mormon. And the pass between Nephihah and Moroni. This is described in Alma. Now we'll go through each of these. So let's start off with the intersecting valleys. I start off with this one because it's very simple. In the Book of Ether, there are two armies, Shiz and Coriantumr, had a running battle to the sea shore. Then they went away from the sea shore and they went through some valleys up to a large body of water. These are in Ether 662, 1426 in the LDS. Just for the sake of time, the summary that I provided, it's in those, like I said, they started off somewhere in the Narrow Neck area. They had a running battle to the east seashore, had a battle, left from there. They went through two valleys, Valley of Shur and the Valley of Korihor. And from there, they went to a large body of water, or the body of water that was largest. So what we have is, as a summary, we need to have somewhere we get to the east seashore. From there, we have to get through two intersecting valleys, because there are two valleys that the two armies were in, and they were next to each other, and they had some battles there. and that has to lead to a very large body of water. Pretty straightforward. Well, this part by the Isthmus of Tehuantepec has that geography. You can start in the narrow neck. You can travel to the east seashore. You can also do that along the river. And if you're having two warring armies, that's going to be the easiest way you travel is down a river system or river valley. You can get to the east seashore, and from there you can actually change direction, come up another river valley, and go through one of those two places I mentioned to get through the mountains. There's a valley here, and then there's a valley here. These intersect. And from there, once you get up into this valley, you can travel all the way to Lake Texcoco, which is the largest body of water in Mexico. So it fits the Book of Mormon description to a T. There is no other location in the world that has this simple connection between east seashore, intersecting valleys, large body of water. These valleys were not included on maps until after 1865. So this is a very simple yet powerful proof. So let's talk about the valley west and the valley east by the hill Riplah. This is one of the last proofs that I investigated because it's very, very, very specific. It had to occur in one place, only one place, and literally I did not know that I would find what I was looking for. So let's go through what we mean by this. So in the book of Alma, the Nephite army was led by Moroni, and the Lamanite army was led by Zerahemnah. They had a battle near the hill Riplah in the land of Manti. Now, the land of Manti was located near the headwaters of the river Sidon. And we get that from Alma 13:69. And it talks about that the borders of Manti by the head of the river Sidon. So we have that connection. Part or one side of the land of Manti was wilderness, and part or the other side was not. We get this from Alma 26:134, LDS 58:13. And thus we did go forth with all of our might against the Lamanites who were in the city of Manti, and we did pitch our tents by the wilderness side, which was near the city. So this provides a distinct description where the headwaters of the river Sidon pass through the land of Manti, where the wilderness or the hilly terrain transitioned to non-wilderness or flatter terrain. So Moroni positioned his army near this area in the valley on the west of the river Sidon and the wilderness side of the land of Manti. And the valleys contain a stream or river, so Alma 27 or 43:24. And it came to pass that the word of the Lord came unto Alma, and Alma informed the messenger of Moroni that the armies of the Lamanites were marching round about in the wilderness, and going on to Alma 20:31. And it came to pass that Moroni caused that his army should be secreted in the valley which was near the bank of the river Sidon, which was on the west of the river Sidon in the wilderness. Very descriptive piece of information. Moroni divided his army and put part of it in a valley on the east of the river Sidon, and part of that of the east valley was placed on the south side of the hill Riplah, and this location concealed that army from the Lamanite army, and then we get this from Alma 20:35 or 43:31. Therefore he divided his army and brought his part over into the valley and concealed them on the east, on the south side of hill Riplah, and the remainder concealed on the west valley, on the west of the river Sidon, and so down into the borders of the land Manti. So we have a description of a valley on the west, a valley on the east. We've got a hill Riplah, and on the south side of that you can hide an army. So when the Lamanite army came by and went on the north side of hill Riplah, on the north side was where the river Sidon was, and we get this from Alma 20:37 or 43:34. And it came to pass that the Lamanites came up on the north side of the hill where a part of the army of Moroni was concealed, or the hill Riplah. And as the Lamanites had passed the hill Riplah and came into the valley and began to cross the river Sidon, the army, and here's that indicator word again, cross. So there's water, they're crossing the river. The army which was concealed on the south of the hill, which was led by the man whose name was Lehi, and he led his army forth and encircled the Lamanites round about on the east in the rear. So here we have the armies engaged in battling each other. This is what it looks like on a internal map. So we have the river Sidon, we have Manti here, we've got South Wilderness here, we've got the hill Riplah here, we have a valley on the west, a valley on the east. This valley on the east comes on the north side of the hill. We've got the Lamanites coming on the north side of the hill, trying to cross the river. We've got the army of Lehi behind on the south side of the hill Riplah coming in around them. We've got the army of Moroni on the front side, so as they crossed the river, they engaged. They tried to turn them back. They tried to retreat, but they couldn't because the army of Lehi was behind them. Great battle maneuver, took care of the Lamanites. But you can see very, very, very detailed description of the terrain. All right, so in summary, we've got headwaters of a river where it transitions from a flat land to hilly mountainous land, has a valley on the west that extends into the hilly mountainous land, has a valley on the east, has a hill on the south side of the river on the east, and the river is on the north side of the hill. There is a space on the south side of the hill to hide an army. So, we should be able to find this place, right? It's pretty detailed. You can see why I hesitated to even look for this place, just because of the amount of detail that was necessary. Well, I looked, and it turns out where the Usumacinta or Rio Salinas River transitions from the flat to hilly land, there is a branch that comes to the west and into the mountainous area here. There's a branch that goes to the east and comes up this way. Now, the significance of this is that in this part of the country, the Lamanite army was coming from a place over here on the east. This mountainous terrain right here does not have a break to get through until you get to this river system. This river system has been the way to get from the south part to the north part for many, many years. Much in the way of Mayan trading is known to have gone right through here. This is the only way through the mountains. This is why the Lamanites were coming through here. It's the only way. So they come down through. The river is on the north side of this hill, and this being a flat hill, not a pointy conical hill, you have plenty of room on the south side of this to hide an army. And enough away from the river that you're not going to be known to the Lamanite army as they're traveling down through here. This occurs only on the Usumacinta River. No other place in the world does this occur. There's no comparable geography on the Grijalva River, which is the other north flowing river in Mexico and used as some people as a location for Book of Mormon lands. This doesn't exist there. This is unique to the world. That's all I can say. This is unique. The smaller river on the West Valley doesn't even show up on maps until 1922 or 1934, somewhere in that area. Does it even start showing up on maps? Let's talk a little bit about the hill Amnihu. The description of the hill Amnihu is in Alma 165 and 170, or LDS 212, 215. Therefore, the people of the Nephites were aware of the intent of the Amlicites, and therefore they did prepare to meet them. And it came to pass that the Amlicites came upon the hill of Amnihu, which was east of the river Sidon, which ran by the land of Zarahemla, and there they began to make war with the Nephites. The Nephite army pushed back the Amalekite army, and the Amalekite army retreated to the city of Minon and joined a Lamanite army that came up to meet them there. The Nephite army stopped at the Valley of Gideon. We get this from Alma 176 or 220. And it came to pass that when Alma could pursue the Amalekites no longer, they caused that his people should pitch their tents in the Valley of Gideon. So the Valley of Gideon is on the east of the river Sidon. We get that from Alma 4:8. And they went over upon the east of the river Sidon into the Valley of Gideon. So we know the location's on the east side. The Amalekites joined forces with Lamanites in Minon, a little further south in the Valley of Gideon, and as the Amalekites and Lamanites started to come back towards Zarahemla, a battle ensued, and the Amalekites and Lamanites were driven to the northwest into the Hermounts, a wilderness or hilly area. We get that from Alma 195 or LES 236. So the summary is Zarahemla is on the west of the river, and there should be a way to cross the river from west side to east side. There's a hill on the east of the river. There's a valley further south along the river, and the river Sidon flows north to south, and the river in the Valley Gideon flows into the river Sidon from the east. And there's hills and mountains northwest of the valley. So this is what it looks like on an internal map. People from Zarahemla met the Amalekite army at the Hill Amnihu, pushed them back. The Amalekites went down to Minon. The Nephite army stopped at the Valley Gideon, sent some spies to see what was going on. People in Minon said, we're getting out of here, and headed up to Zarahemla. So, if we take a look at that part of Guatemala-Mexico border, we actually do find a hill right here on the east between Zarahemla and this valley that comes in the Rio Passion from the east. When you try and come back up along the river and you have a battle off here to the northwest, is hilly terrain. So this hill on the east side of the river, this is what it looks like from a satellite picture. Very nondescript even from a satellite picture. I had to draw a line around it. This right here is the size of the hill. It's about 400 feet high, which is a pretty good size hill. Zarahemla would be right around here. So it's really not big, but it is distinct. It is 400 feet high. And the Usumacinta location is the only narrow neck location in the world that has this geographic feature. The Grijalva River has slopes up to the mountain. It does not have a hill where the Hill Amnihu should be located. And some early maps put mountain artwork on the east side of the Usumacinta River, but they do that just because they need to fill up space. A map that doesn't have anything on it didn't sell very well, so you just fill in spaces that were not explored with whatever you wanted to put in there. It was usually just kind of artwork. But the hill actually didn't appear on maps until at least 1934. There's a suggestion of a hill that I found on one map in 1934, but really I didn't find any indication a hill was there until the more detailed geologic information in the 1980s and 1990s when they were starting to digitize geography. Is really what really says there's a hill there on the east side of the river. So obviously nothing that was known about that in 1831. Oh, by the way, there is a way to get from the west to the east side of the river. This is a reconstruction of what the bridge from Yaxchilan to the east side of the river looked like. It has two piers. It was about 600 feet span. At the time was the longest bridge in the world. Even when you consider bridges in Europe, this was the longest bridge in the world at the time. So the people, at least in this area, have been trying to find a way across the river easily for many, many years. Don't know when that bridge originally started. These abutments and the piers are still there. You can see them at low water level. But how far they go back, they haven't been able to date that. But it has been an issue in that part of the river to cross the river there. I just thought that was interesting. Okay, destruction of Moroni, Jerusalem, Mokum, and Onahah by water. Came across this just purely by chance. Was not looking for this. I was looking for something else. As I was doing Google searches, this article came up, and I said, well, okay, I'll go take a look at that. And I started looking at the article, and my wife Lori can attest to this. I got really excited after looking at this. So the description here is in 3rd Nephi. The cities Moroni, Onahah, Mokum, and Jerusalem were destroyed by water. So this is in 3rd Nephi 4:29 or LDS 9:4. And behold, that great city of Moroni have I caused to be sunk in the depths of the sea, and the inhabitants therefore to be drowned. Yea, and the city of Onahah, and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Mokum, and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Jerusalem, and the inhabitants thereof, and the waters have I caused to come up in the stead thereof. So these cities are located on the sea east coast. However, there are other cities located on the sea east coast, Lehi, Morianton, Omner, Gid, and Mulek, that were not destroyed by water. And so the question is, why are some destroyed by water and not others? So here's what it looks like on a picture. And I put little tsunami waves down here just to indicate these are where the cities were destroyed by water. But there are other cities along the coast here that were not destroyed by water. Question is, why? So we know that 3 of the cities were destroyed by waters coming up. Great. So what causes water to come up? Could it be a storm surge or a tsunami? That's really the only 2 choices you have that cause water to come up. So storm surge along the coast in that area have been recorded at over 17 feet during hurricanes. Okay, that would certainly cover up cities along the coast. Problem with that is that winds were not described as part of the destructions for the water coming up. And so considering that King Limhi mentioned the east wind of destruction, you would think that if that was part of the destructions of the water coming up, that might be mentioned. It didn't. So storm surge also occurs over a large portion of the coast. You can't localize storm surge. Wherever the storm is, that's where the storm surge occurs. So storm surge can't be discounted, but it's not real consistent with the descriptions in the Book of Mormon. So that leaves us, let's take a look at tsunamis. They don't require any associated wind. And this is the study that I found. It was published in 2003. Nice scientific name, The Estimation of the Far-Field Tsunami Potential for the Caribbean Coast Based on Numerical Simulation. That's a wonderful thing to read right when you want to go to bed, right? And I don't know why I keyed off on a title like that, but it's like, well, okay, I'll take a look at it. So I located it in 2006. So this is after I had found and put all these places in a world location in 2004. So that's what I mentioned there. And the authors investigated the source of earthquakes, the shape of the seafloor in the Caribbean, and developed a model for predicting where tsunamis would occur. They did this because the countries in the Caribbean wanted to know, where do I need to put resources for potential tsunamis to help the people living along the coasts? And so that was why this study was done. So the summary here is we have water coming up from something that destroys only certain cities, and those are Jerusalem, Mokum, and Onahah. At the same time, water coming up does not destroy the cities along the coast. So in the study, this is from the study, they plotted where all the earthquakes occur. And they occur all around the Caribbean, down here through Mesoamerica, across the top of South America, and across all the islands in the Caribbean, and a few smattering places, other places. Then they found all the records of historical tsunamis. And this is what they found. They found tsunamis in all the places where you can have earthquakes and across the northern part of Honduras, and they stopped right there. They could find no records of historical tsunamis along the Belize coast. And the reason for that, when they did through the numerical simulation and the depth of the ocean and where it focused in here and where the earthquakes occurred, and they essentially made earthquakes happen all around and figured out where tsunamis would occur. What they did was they found that there were certain safe areas that no matter where you start and no matter where you had an earthquake, these places would never have a tsunami. So a few places on the southern part of Cuba, a place here in South America. Oh, and oh, by the way, the coast of Belize, you can't have a tsunami. It just won't happen. So that was, I see a study like this that says we've got tsunamis where the Book of Mormon says there's tsunamis, and you're not going to have tsunamis where the Book of Mormon says we didn't record any tsunamis. I was excited. And the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is the only location for a narrow neck where you have this distinction of certain cities that can be destroyed by water and certain cities not destroyed by water. Just an aside, the Mayans knew about tsunamis. They have a wave glyph. This is from the Dresden Codex. There is a set of glyphs in Chichen Itza, and I was there, but I located this picture after I was there. I wish I had known about this. I would have actually gone around Chichen Itza and I would have located and taken my own picture of this glyph. But it has a picture of a person drowning. It has a city falling into the sea. It has a volcano erupting. It has a tsunami glyph right here and a person here in a canoe or some kind of boat. So all the destructions that we see in 3rd Nephi are actually in this glyph. So I would have loved to have had my own photograph so I could tell you exactly where it was located. Plains in Mesoamerica. Let's talk about those a little bit. There are several plains. The plains of Agash, plains of Heshlon, plains of Nephi-Ha, and the plains near Mulek are all described in the Book of Mormon. And at a high level, this is where they're located. Plains of Agash and Heshlon are in this area by the Narrow Neck. The plains west of Mulek would be over here in the Yucatan, and the plains of Nephi-Ha would be here in kind of northeastern Guatemala. All right, so there are plains in Mesoamerica, yes. While Mesoamerica is known for jungles, there are actually 3 areas of plains before 300 AD. 2 of these 3 plains exist today. Between about 1000 BC and 300 AD, the central lowlands of the Yucatan Peninsula were actually savanna. Right now, they're lowland forest. The climate has changed a bit to where it's now a lowland forest. But back between 1000 BC and about 300 AD, they were actually savannas. The Maya Mountains in Belize create kind of a rain shield. So the northeast part of Guatemala doesn't get as much rain as other parts, so it has a savanna area. And the Pacific Ocean helps create grasslands, the Pacific Ocean being a cool current. The cool air usually prevents rain, so it's a little bit drier there on the west coast. So there are plains in that narrow neck area, and there's actually a lot of place names today in the area that use the word llano, which means plain. So this is one analysis. Again, don't ask me why I find these. but this is from an analysis of compound-specific carbon isotopes of lipid biomarkers, a proxy for the paleo-environmental change in the Maya lowlands of Petén, Guatemala. I just dig these things up out of nowhere. This was published in 2005, so I mean, when I made the map and location, this wasn't even published yet. So the summary here is they took a look at the lakes of the Petén region, which are in kind of northeast Guatemala, and they just dug down and took cores, and they started figuring out what the pollen count was going back so many years. And this is what they came up with, that at the time of the Nephites, roughly about 50% of the vegetation was grass. Today, it's only about 15%. So it's mostly forest now, but back then, it was grass. Very grass-like. So there would be plains right there. Another study, this is the paleolimnology of the Maya lowlands, published by Mark Brenner, Michael F. Rosenmeyer, and David Hodel, Jason Curtis in 2002. So they actually plotted rainfall. So at the time of the Nephites, the rainfall was at its lowest point in that area. It had been stable for a while, then it went lower, and then it's back up kind of at the stable area. So the forest during the time of the Nephites was not there. There was very little or a lot less forest than there is now. So that just corroborates the pollen study that we just saw. This a little dark, but you can see it's kind of grassy here. There's a couple trees in the background. It's grassy here. There's some trees on the hill. This place by Popton, Guatemala, this is where these pictures come from. And so you can kind of see it's very savanna-like. It's grasslands with some savanna trees. They're not forest trees, they're actually savanna trees in one of the few places in Mesoamerica where they occur. So, if we identify where the plains occur here. During the time of the Nephites, plains occurred there, even though now it's lowland forest. And we have plains right here. Oh, by the way, all three of these are where the Book of Mormon says they ought to be. So this is the only world location where plains exist where they're described by the Book of Mormon. The plains are located, they don't correspond to the Grajal River, theory of Book of Mormon geography. The savanna area northeast of Guatemala is not well known even today. There's really no maps published in 1830. I can't even tell you if there was a map between then and now, because even now it's hard to find that there are actually savannas in the northeast Guatemala area. It's just something that nobody ever talks about because it's like it's there. And the plains in the Yucatan Peninsula were not even known to exist in 1830 because they were converted over to lowland forest way before Columbus. So there's even no way to know that there were plains that were there. But in the Book of Mormon, it says they're there, and the scientific evidence shows that they were there at the time. So that's another proof. Talk about narrow passes for a bit. This comes from Alma 2235 and 2410, or LDS 5034 and 529. And it came to pass that they did not head them until they had come to the borders of the land desolation. And we know that land desolation is in the narrow neck by the sea west. And there they did head them by the narrow pass, which led into the sea, led by the sea into the land northward, yea, by the sea on the west and on the east. And he also set orders unto him, and they should fortify the land bountiful and secure the narrow pass which led into the land northward, lest the Lamanites should obtain that point. There are two others, these are in Mormon 161 and 169, that mention a pass into the land southward. And the Lamanites did give unto us the land northward, yea, even to the narrow passage which led into the land southward. So the land southward is a completely different direction than the land northward. So we're actually talking about another pass. In 169 or 3:5, it came to pass that I did cause my people that they should gather themselves together at the land desolation to a city which was in the borders by the narrow pass which led in the land southward. So we have two descriptions of narrow passes. So as covered previously, we talked about the city of Desolation located by the sea west of the narrow neck. So the summary is there's a narrow pass that leads into the land northward. There's a narrow pass that leads into the land southward. And these passes are located near the West Sea in the area of the narrow neck or by the land Desolation. All right. Do they exist? Well, of course they do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be presenting it. So, if land Desolation is somewhere here in the narrow neck, there is one pass that kind of follows this route up through Oaxaca. There's another one that goes up. There's a road that goes up through here. That's the pass that goes into the land southward. For 100 miles this direction and at least 100, maybe 150 miles this direction, there is no way to get through the mountains. And this is the only pass through here. There is no other pass until you get to the pass with the intersecting valleys. And along here, it's mountainous. So these are the only two passes that exist. So it's not like you have options in saying, well, this one fits because this one's too far away. These are the only two passes that exist in this area. This is just a picture of one of the areas along the North Pass. Right here, you can see it's fairly broad at this point. The next picture I've got is a little bit further up. You can see it actually necks down to a narrow pass as it goes through the mountains at that point. So only in places where the river bed kind of narrows out do you have any kind of habitation, but otherwise it's fairly narrow as it goes through the mountains. This is the only picture I could find of the pass on the south. This is a picture that somebody took while they were on the road that's going through this pass, back down through the pass. And you can see it's fairly narrow. The road has to switch back a couple times to even make it up through here. And this picture was taken right about here on this road. So it's about halfway up the pass. So in terms of narrow neck locations, it's the only narrow neck location that has passes both to the north and to the south. So since we're talking about passes, let's talk about the pass between Nephi-Ha and Moroni. This is described in Alma 29, 28, or 62:24. And now when the Lamanites awoke, they saw that the armies of Moroni were within the walls, and they were afraid exceedingly, and insomuch that it did flee out by the pass. The verse here references places of Moroni and Nephi-Ha. The Lamanites fled to the land of Moroni, which was on the sea-east coast. There's a pass between the city of Nephi and the land of Moroni. And since the army of Moroni and Paharan were on the west side of the city, then this pass would be on the east side of the city for the Lamanites to escape. In the Belize Mountains, or Maya Mountains in Belize, there is only one pass. And it happens to be in the location where Nephi-Ha would be located over here by the plains, which are also located over here. This pass right here is the only pass through the mountains. There's no gap further up, and there's no gap further down until you get way down here to the south. That is the only pass through the mountains, exactly where the Book of Mormon says it ought to be. This is just an example. I have a number of sources that I look at old maps. This is an old map published in 1851. You can see it's an unbroken mountain chain. There are no passes. This is another one, again, no passes. This one, published in 1857, actually has a pass right here. This map is inaccurate. This pass does not actually exist. But it's a pass. So we'll give them a pass. All right, so the summary. We've talked about intersecting valleys, the valley west and the valley east, Hilam-Nehu, destruction of the cities by water, plains in Mesoamerica, narrow passes, and the passes between Nephi-Ha and Moroni. All of those only occur in one place of the world, in the exact same place as the Book of Mormon says they exist, if you plot that in this part of the world. take a little break, talk a little bit about Kurulums and Kumums. Everybody has comments about this because they're not really described in the Book of Mormon very well. But let's first talk about Genesis 2:11. This is an inspired version. This is not in the King James. And out of the ground made I the Lord God, and grow every tree naturally that was pleasant in the sight of man, and man could behold it, and it became also a living soul, and it was spiritual in the day that I created it, for it remained in the sphere in which I, God, created it, yea, even all things which I prepared for the use of man, and man saw that it was good for food. So the understanding of this phrase helps a lot, because for the use of man means food, not for beasts of burden and plowing fields. When it says for the use of man, it says I'm going to eat it. So the Book of Mormon has a pattern where it states both male and female of animals in 1 Nephi 5, 2:16. And it came to pass that they did find upon the land of promise, as we journeyed in the wilderness, that there were beasts in the forest of every kind, both of the cow and the ox. This is, in Hebrew, you have both a female and male, and so the ox would be female, cow would be female, ox would be male. Both the ass and the horse. Ass is in Hebrew would be the female horse, and horse would be the male horse. And the goat and the wild goat. When you see wild in the Hebrew, that usually refers to the male. So we have a pattern here of female, male, female, male, female, male. And then we get to and all manner of wild animals which were for the use of men. So we could eat those. Now in Ether 421, they also had horses and asses. So here we have a male and female form in Hebrew. And there were elephants and Kurulums and Kumums, all of which were useful unto man, and more especially the elephants and Kurulums and Kumums. So here we have useful for men, so all of these could be eaten. So I've checked the Akkadian and Neo-Assyrian languages, and there really is no close matches for Kurulum and Kumum. Tells you what I do late at night, reading Akkadian dictionaries. Latin, there is a word Kurulum, or Kurul, which means chair of authority, and there is at least one reference that indicates it could refer to a platform set upon the elephant to ride upon. So since only authority figures rode on elephants, that was why they referred to the chair on the elephant as a Kurulum. There's also a place called Kerala, or Kerala. It's a town in southwest India, which happens to be known for using domesticated elephants, and they were the source of domesticated elephants going way back. So those are really the only two close words that I could find having anything to do with animals, called Kurulum or Kurula. Now, there is an indicator word. Book of Mormon has several of these. Was near, I've mentioned before, means next to or adjacent to. Even or yea even indicates like what we would use as parentheses. So everywhere where you see even or yea even, whatever that is that comes right after it is explaining what comes right before it. There is across or cross, and I've mentioned that. That's only used for going across water. Up and down indicate going up in altitude or down in altitude. I've heard people try and describe up as up north. The convention of up north didn't come about until like the mid-1600s. Before that, maps had the top part could have faced west, east, south. It was just random. Somewhere in the 1600s, people started putting north at the top part, so then we got the phrase up north. Especially means more of or indicate, or more so or more of is an indicator word for especially. So now, when we go back to Ether 421, that they also had horses, which could be male, asses, which could be female, and there were elephants and Kurulums and Kumums, all of which were useful to man. So we can eat all these five. And more especially, the elephants, Kurulums, and Kumums. So that indicator word indicates that Kurulums and Kumums were bigger than horses. So how many animals do we know of that are bigger than horses? I can think of elephants. So if we take a look at that, so are elephants used general in 420, or same as in 420 where we have all manner of cattle, which is cows in general, but then we talk about oxen, which are male, and cows, which are female. So that would make a curulum a male and a cumum as a female elephant. Or is it elephants male, curulum female, and cumums as a juvenile? I don't know, but all I know is a curulum and a cumum is bigger than a horse. Finish up with a couple of interesting growth patterns in the Book of Mormon. If you take a look and plot out the first mention of cities and lands and where they occurred, I'm just going to quickly go through these, and you'll start seeing all of these geographical items show up on the map, and you'll see a pattern in how they develop. So, start off in the north part of the lands, and we have the Promised Land. And I'm just going to go through these, and you can kind of see how they grow and where they're located. Now we start going north. Go north, we come back to the south. Battle site, intersecting valleys, large river, and we get back down to Hill Ramah, which is the same as Hill Cumorah. So, okay, these were just some of the ridges that were shown there. Let's take a look at how the Nephites grew. So they start off at Nephi, have some wildernesses that pop up. There's the wilderness, South Wilderness, and Zarahemla that shows up there. We have some cities down south, Mormon, Wilderness of Mormon, Waters of Mormon, more cities down south, some more wildernesses, more cities down south, more wildernesses. Now we start building up along the River Sidon. There's the River Sidon that pops in there, River Valley of Gideon. We start building around Zarahemla, along River Sidon. Now we are up in kind of the northwest quadrant. We get some cities growing up there. We start going down to the South Wilderness, or below the South Wilderness, and in the Lamanite lands, the headwaters, back up the East Wilderness pops in there. We start building along the South Wilderness, more along the River Sidon. Now you can see where we're not building. Now we're starting to build in on the far east side. Now we start building on the west side. So it's kind of interesting when you see it grow like that, where the patterns are occurring. All right, let's take a look at the latter part of the Nephites up in the northern part of the land. We have the River Sidon, Bountiful. We have places in the Narrow Neck. Land northward shows up. Mulek shows up. We're still kind of down in the Narrow Neck. We haven't really started. Now we start seeing some of the, we're still kind of down in the Narrow Neck. Now we start building up to the north. This is where the Lamanites are starting to push them in the latter parts of the Book of Mormon. So just the way that you would normally expect societies to start building and building around each other and growing, not here and there and there and there. You kind of grow around one place and then you kind of grow around another place, because you need cities that are close to other cities to kind of provide mutual protection. And we see that in the patterns of the Book of Mormon. So I've gone over a little bit. What I have here is is a website where I have this, actually, not all of this, some of this stuff doesn't even show up on my website yet, but I will be putting it there. There is a website here. You could write down https://sites.google.com/site/BOM geography, or you can just put in my name and geography in a Google search and it'll be the first one that shows up. Your choice. The last one is usually easier to find the website. But there's other information. There's a lot of these proofs on the website. There's travel maps. There's a lot of other information on this website.
Thank you, Brother Eric, for sharing. I was appreciative of the unique spelling of your name because it does make it very easy to get to your Google website. I want to be respectful of people's evening plans in case you're trying to get to an evening service. And so if you have questions, let's direct them to Brother Eric offline. And remember, too, I don't think the expectation is that any one of us could deliver this quantity of material, but any one of these proofs makes the Book of Mormon a valid historical document. And if that's the case, the world needs to know that, and then people can decide for themselves what kind of spiritual ramifications this will have for them if this is a document that has a valid place in the world. And so that's very, very interesting. And again, how about a round of applause just as a show of appreciation? Thank you. And may God bless you with the rest of your evening.
I will stay up here for anybody that wants to ask any questions.